Now, Olga Deutsch is the director of NGO Monitor, a watchdog group that promotes greater transparency amongst foreign-funded, non-governmental organisations. And we'll get into that in a second, what they are, that operate in Israel. Olga, welcome to Outsiders. How are you?
Good morning. It is great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, our pleasure. Now, Olga, just briefly explain what an NGO is and why you're monitoring them. What are they up to?
So NGO, as you rightly said so, stands for the non-governmental organization. Basically, in any democracy, we want a thriving civil society, so having non-governmental ways of organizing civic participation is a pivotal part of that. It allows any one of us to have a political opinion and voice it in the public discourse in an organized manner without having to be elected. Now, in Europe particularly, but to some extent in Australia as well, some of these groups, particularly the ones focusing on human rights and humanitarian causes, are supported through official development and cooperation programs by their respective governments. Just to get your ear around it, the 30 most developed countries around the world between 2011 and 2018, according to OECD, provided financial aid in the worth of $177 billion to and through NGOs, non-governmental organizations around the world. It's
so
just to say that they get a very serious seat around the table.
So we're talking, Olga, about the amnesties, Human Rights Watch, Oxfam, these sorts of organisations that people hear about all the time and think, oh yeah, they're a kind of do-gooder organisation. But according to you and your monitoring group, many of them aren't doing so much good.
You're right. What we see in our research is that many of them, instead of promoting human rights or humanitarian causes, so helping the needy or lighting those distortions of human rights, they promote politicized agenda. And in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, sadly, we catch them promoting anti-Semitic content, sometimes having ties with terror-linked organizations, promoting boycott and sanctions, the divestment movement against Israel. In other words, doing everything other than human rights.
James.
So are these groups, Olga, then being funded by governments? And if they're getting money from governments, is this a way then essentially for the left to escape scrutiny and the sort of legislative scrutiny about where people's and taxpayers' money goes in terms of funding a leftist agenda that most people wouldn't agree with in the Middle East or really anywhere else?
Well, I'm not even sure that most of the people will know what these groups are promoting. So what happens is that taxpayers' money are being used to promote values that are they're directly opposed to those that governments officially have vis-a-vis Israel or the conflict. Let's take you mentioned Amnesty International. Let's take their latest report, which tries to make a legal claim that Israel is an apartheid state. No government, most of the governments oppose that very clearly, yet you have one of the largest human rights groups that comes with a tremendous halo around it. Everyone trusted for doing the right thing around the world and for flagging violations of human rights, saying exactly the opposite. Now, why? Because they're trying to make a legal case that will be used to push the International Criminal Court in The Hague to continue with the investigation against Israel. It is unheard of, and all this wrapped up in a context of human rights.
Rita.
Olga, I just want to ask you about the recent terror attacks in Israel. I know one was very close to your home. Can you tell us a little bit about what's happening in Israel right now?
Well, unfortunately, we are seeing, it is clear that we are seeing another wave of terror attacks. It is horrorizing the country because they're random. In shopping malls and streets, and some of them are using machine guns and some knives. So there's a sense of fear in the streets of Israel. While I've been enjoying your lovely country here in the last week, I have gotten multiple messages from my children's schools and kindergartens. Everyone is on alert. and the government is trying to do something about it, especially that we are in the week of the Ramadan holidays, which is always a high-tensed week. So I hope we will see soon the end of this, because my country is always strained with terror. But when it reaches its peaks, like now, when it is clear that it is a wave, it is mortifying, because at the end of the day, we are sending our kids and we're just going around our daily business, and we feel threatened and violated.
So just briefly, Olga, I've got to wrap the interview. We're running out of time, but just very briefly, tell us, you've identified specific links between some of those Dogooder NGOs and terrorists. Just tell us briefly about that.
Yeah, so it's quite telling, with the previous question, that terror comes with different faces. In 2019, there was a terror attack which left a 16-year-old girl, Rina Schnurr, murdered. In the terror cell that was arrested was of 50 people. At least 5 were senior employees of some of these human rights non-governmental organizations. All of them at that point enjoyed generous funding by the EU and other European governments. So that's just an example of how some of these groups basically violate their mandate and violate the trust of the taxpayers, who believe that their public funds are used for doing good and promoting democracy, human rights, and other things that are supposed to actually help the people in the Middle East reach peace. But if I may end on a slightly more positive note, if you allow me, in the midst of the terror attack, we also witnessed what is probably the most exciting testimony to changing ties in the Middle East, and that was the Negev summit that saw leaders from Bahrain, UAE, Egypt, and so on come in Israel and clearly send a message that terror will be not tolerated, and that terror is the joint threat that we have to address together.
Olga Deutsch, thanks so much for coming on Outsiders. Thank you very much. Keep up the great work.